Speculation about the unbundling of Eskom. In his response to Parliament last week, President Ramaphosa said Eskom will not be privatised, but the three separate parts, namely generation, transmission and distribution, will be 100% state-owned. Yesterday, SAA, or South African Airways, refuted claims that the company may be considering privatisation, saying that the message got lost in translation and that the changes relate to their operating model and that they will remain a single entity with a reconfiguration of its resources. Now, meanwhile, trade unions have vowed to fight any form of privatisation. Isaah Mhlanga, he is the Executive Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes Investments, is here in studio to give us some perspective on whether state-owned entities, or SOEs, are beginning to rethink their operating models to achieve maximum efficiencies. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So really, SOEs are under the spotlight right now, and rightly so, and I think due to many reasons, but we're just seeing the debt burden, we're seeing them overstaffed, we're seeing them, in a nutshell, doing a very bad or a disservice to the rest of South Africa, because that's bringing us down. In both of these companies, they're both saying they're refusing the privatisation route. Let's get your opinions. What do you think, or what can we read into some of the announcements that have been made?
I think, Leanne, the tragedy is this. State-owned companies have given so much burden to the consumer in the form of taxes, which means you and I have been paying taxes for far too long, but the return that we get from those taxes is continued increase in electricity prices, also continued increase in terms of support to the likes of SAA, the likes of Dinel, and the likes of SABC. We don't see the service that we expect from these SOEs, but the taxes continue to increase. I think that is the underlying feature. But it's not a revenue problem, because these state-owned companies, they continue to make revenues in some instances, but it's the cost base that continues to increase, in part because they have too much in terms of a headcount which they have than they require, which means as part of solving the financial stability or sustainability of these SOEs, there have to be job cuts.
If we look at breaking up these entities, it seems like 3 is the magic word. And SAA were very quick to come out and say, guys, you're misinterpreting what we're saying here. It'll still remain one SAA, but the divisions will be run under the mother company, okay? Eskom, however, that is an unbundling that we're looking at. But hasn't it been said that, you know, unbundling is the first phase of privatisation, even though the president is denying that, saying, not privatisation, this is not the route we're going? Perhaps you can give us a better understanding.
Look, ordinarily, if one talks about unbundling, it means that there is going to be a sale of some aspect of that SOE or company some months or years later. So it's just the first preparation for that sale. But if we listen to the message that are coming, you would understand that it's a political economy for SOEs, given that we're ahead of an election and there is significant pushback from trade unions against privatization. But let's just look at Telkom, for instance. This is a company that was owned by the state 100%, which was part privatized. It now pays dividends to the state of 800 million per year, which means it's returning money. It's paying a return to the state. Why can't it be done with Eskom? Why can't it be done with SAA, given that these are businesses that sell a service for which you and I will pay for? We are not receiving these services for free, which means they have to help in terms of increasing competitiveness in the space to which they play, so that the cost for you and me in getting that service is reduced. So really, they have to look at which ones are strategic and which ones are non-strategic, and sell off the non-strategic and keep those which will enhance government's need to increase competitiveness and improve services to people.
Yeah, I mean, we look at SAA. SAA, we're talking, we'll try and get into the amount of money that these state-owned entities are actually needing. Yesterday we saw a lifeline from the banks, 3.5 billion to keep it afloat, which is what they need, but they need more, about 17 billion more. Eskom, I mean, they're down 440 billion. I suppose the question is, where is this money going to come from?
It's going to come from me and you. We are going to foot some of that bill when Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is going to announce his budget on Wednesday in Cape Town. He is going to provide support to Eskom. I'm estimating somewhere in the tune of 15 to 20 billion that is going to be given to Eskom, but that without a turnaround strategy that is going to be put together, which is going to put Eskom's financial sustainability on the good footing, it's not going to help. It's only going to lead to a potential downgrade from the likes of Moody's. But if you look at SAA, the restructuring to three components, perhaps it's going to help to actually isolate where are the problem areas. If you distinguish local from regional to international, you can deal specifically with the ones that are non-profitable. But what is required is to actually look at all the contracts that were signed over the past couple of years, because it is the procurement systems which were flouted, which means services that were provided to SAA were overcharged. And that is part of the problem that needs to be addressed.
Do you think that our finance minister has some trick up his sleeve? I mean, is there something that he could possibly say tomorrow during the budget that's going to give us some clarity on Eskom and the way forward, and perhaps SAA as well and the way forward?
I think the only silver bullet that he can provide is to provide a pragmatic turnaround strategy for all these SOEs. Yes, it's politically difficult because it involves the need to cut headcount, which the trade unions are pushing back. But here's the decision which trade unions need to make. We lose 10,000 jobs or 17,000 jobs at Eskom now, and a couple of more at SAA now, in order to set these institutions on a good financial sustainability path so that they can help the economy grow and create potentially 500,000 jobs over the next 5 years. Or we protect the 17,000 jobs now, so that, which will imply that the state-owned companies continue to be a risk for the fiscus, which means it's also a risk in terms of credit rating downgrades, and also the risk for the economy as a whole, which means we are likely to lose much more jobs over the next couple of years. That is the decision trade unions need to make. But I think they are not being honest enough to admit they just protect those that have jobs now at the expense of those that still lie outside of the job market, which for me is not sustainable.
Yeah, but we both know which direction they're going to go in. I mean, their job is to protect the employees that pay them to protect them, and that's what they're going to try and do. SAA in its explanation was talking about a strategic equity partner. This has long been in the pipeline, and we've been speaking about this for a very long time. But once again, that for me is a little bit confusing. What does that mean? I mean, is that not the step to privatization?
A strategic equity partner means you are looking for a private investor who is going to buy a stake that is part privatization.
Yeah.
So it really talks to an unbundling, which is going to require a private player. And that is the only way which you can get money into these SOEs, because without selling off equity, there's no one who is going to be willing to buy these SOEs given the amount of debt which they have.
Do you think that's the way to go? I mean, if we have to be honest, and if we look at the state of these entities and where they're sitting financially, and if you do have somebody who is actually willing to come in and take the risk and turn it around, is that the route to go for both of these companies, Eskom and SAA? I
would believe that is the route that the state needs to go, because it introduces also another layer in terms of governance. If you have private players that are part owners of these SOEs, it means they're going to enforce the right way of doing business. They're going to oversee how contracts are signed in terms of services which are provided to SOEs, and in that way it will help to curb some of the costs which these SOEs are incurring unnecessarily. And again, the one example that we always have to look at is Telkom. It pays the state dividends, which means it's benefiting South Africans. That's what we need. Ownership for its sake is not useful. You have to own an asset that benefits the people of South Africa.
Yeah, and as it stands right now, it's those two entities. I mean, we're not even focusing in on other state-owned entities, but because Eskom and SAA have been in the headlines, that's what we're looking at. You know, you look at other issues that our finance minister has to look at, because a lot of people saying that this it's an exceptionally hard budget that he has to deliver tomorrow. Are there any things that you're anticipating? I mean, we were talking about the fuel levy. I'm on a different tangent at the moment, but as you mentioned, we're the ones that are going to be paying for any turnaround strategy with our taxes. But are there any things that are going to come out of this budget that are they're going to hurt us? Or what are you anticipating?
I'm not anticipating any increase in terms of VAT. We had that last year.
Yeah, I don't
I'm not
think
expecting
we can go there.
Personal income tax to increase. It's an election year. I'm not expecting corporate income tax to increase, given that profitability of corporates have been declining over the past couple of years, given the low growth that we see in the economy. So to increase tax for corporates when the economy is weak is really harming them. What I would expect, for instance, will be something like a dividend withholding tax, some form of wealth tax, which talks into the narrative of we need to redistribute from the rich to the poor. That would work. But also sin taxes, which if you look at ad valorem tax in taxes, they constitute just about 20% of the total tax revenues for the state. That is where I see most of the increase in taxes coming through, which for me, I think that's all right. If you can afford to drink whiskey, I'm sure you can afford to pay more for it. That doesn't hurt the poor necessarily. So what is the problem? The problem is really on the expenditure side. Also on the revenue side, you can't do much because growth is weak. You can't increase taxes, which means the adjustment has to be done on the expenditure side. And part of that expenditure is guarantees that are given to state-owned companies, which are not really providing, a benefit to society, which to the same extent that we require, given that they continue to request bailouts from the state. So government has to cut on unnecessary spending, on unproductive spending, so that our fiscal deficits can narrow. My expectations will be a fiscal deficit of about 4.1%, which is slightly lower to what was announced last year in October. But this budget, as you said rightly, is going to be the most difficult one for Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. There are not really much levers that he can pull, which means it's difficult for all of us.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult one. We do know that, but it is the balancing act of pleasing your voters and also pleasing business, because those are two entities that are very difficult to please. Just finally, if we look at other countries and the way that their state-owned entities are run, we know that it's mismanagement at the heart of all of it, and I think we've spoken a lot about that in previous interviews. But can a state-owned entity work? Or is privatisation the way to go for all of our state-owned entities?
Privatisation is not the way to go for all of them. But at the same time, state entities can work and improve economic growth for countries. Look at China. Most of the investments that you see in the rest of the continent, in other continents as well, are driven by state-owned companies. How are they managing to do it? It is because the people that run these state-owned enterprises, if they are found wanting in terms of corruption, they are punished harshly, which means everybody that steps into that seat, they are there to really run the institution in an efficient manner. And corruption is dealt with. So far, we have not seen a single person that is being arrested, yet billions and billions of money are getting wasted. So this says there is no political will, at least in the past 10 years or in the past 25 years, there wasn't political will to punish the wrongdoers that run these state entities down to the ground. If you look at how Chinese SOEs work, they compete with private players, which means they help to drive costs down for the rest of the economy. This is what state-owned companies should be doing.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us, Isaah. Great insight into SOEs and also a little bit of a preview into what to expect from tomorrow's budget. Isaah Mhlanga is Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes Investments, and we thank him very, very much for joining us here in studio. Just gone 7. Let's get the news from Sakina.